The moment Aaliyah Carter stepped into the sprawling mansion, she knew life was about to change, but not in the way she imagined. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and leather, a stark contrast to the modest apartments she had grown up in. She adjusted the strap of her apron nervously, her eyes catching the glint of an expensive watch as someone moved swiftly down the grand staircase. Jinwoo Han, the infamous Korean Mafia boss, appeared almost like a shadow in the dim light, tall, composed, with a stare that could freeze anyone in place. Aaliyah's heart skipped, not from fear but from an odd curiosity. She had heard the rumors: ruthless, intimidating, untouchable. Yet, when his gaze met hers, it was the faintest flicker of something unreadable that unsettled her even more. "Careful with that," Jinwoo's deep voice broke the silence, eyes scanning the small coffee cup in her hands. Before she could respond, the cup slipped, spilling dark liquid across his crisp white shirt. Aaliyah froze, cheeks flaming, words stumbling over each other. He sighed, but instead of anger, his eyes softened for a fleeting moment. "Accidents happen," he said quietly, and before either could retreat, Aaliyah instinctively stepped forward to dab at the stain. Their hands brushed, and the unexpected warmth of that simple contact sent a surprising comfort through both of them. For the first time, Jinwoo allowed himself a brief, almost imperceptible smile, and without thinking, he offered a gentle hug. It was not romantic, at least not yet, but it carried a promise of unspoken understanding. Aaliyah felt the tension in her chest ease as she returned the embrace, sensing that this mansion, this man, might change the course of her life forever. Little did they know, this accidental meeting was the spark that would ignite a connection neither could resist. Aaliyah had barely unpacked her few belongings when the mansion's rhythm began to reveal itself. The quiet hum of the air conditioning, the soft click of Jinwoo's polished shoes on marble floors, even the faint murmur of staff in the distance. All of it felt foreign yet strangely compelling. She had never worked in a place so grand, nor had she been under the watchful gaze of someone so unknowable. That afternoon she wandered into the backyard, carrying a basket of laundry. The sun poured over the neatly trimmed garden, and for a moment she allowed herself to breathe. It was then she noticed him, Jinwoo, kneeling by a small stray dog tangled in the bushes. His hands were surprisingly gentle, carefully untangling the frightened animal. Aaliyah hesitated, unsure if she should intrude, but something about the scene drew her closer. "He's lucky you found him," she said softly, startling Jinwoo just enough to make him glance her way. His eyes, usually so guarded, softened, and for a moment, he looked less like the untouchable boss she had heard about and more like a man who cared. Without thinking, she stepped forward and offered him a hand to steady the dog. Their fingers brushed, and Jinwoo's stern expression broke into a quiet chuckle. "Seems you have a knack for showing up at the right moment," he said, voice low but warm. When the dog scampered off, Jinwoo looked at Aaliyah and, in an uncharacteristic gesture, pulled her into a brief hug, a quiet acknowledgement of shared humanity. It wasn't bold or romantic yet, but it carried an intimacy neither had expected, a silent promise of understanding. As Aaliyah stepped back, cheeks warming, she realized something. This man, this mysterious Jinwoo Han, was slowly unraveling the wall she had built around herself. And maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to do the same. The mansion always felt alive after sunset, shadows stretching across the polished floors, painting stories Aaliyah could almost read. That evening, she was tidying the library when she heard the faintest sigh from the study. Curious, she peeked in and found Jinwoo sitting alone, shoulders tense, fingers drumming against the edge of his desk. He hadn't noticed her yet, lost in a private world that seemed heavy with unspoken burdens. Aaliyah hesitated, unsure if she should interrupt. But something told her that this man, the one everyone whispered about in fear and awe, carried more than just authority. He carried loneliness. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said softly, stepping inside. Jinwoo looked up, his dark eyes momentarily unreadable, before the faintest flicker of relief crossed his face. "You didn't have to come in," he replied, voice quieter than usual, almost human. Aaliyah crossed the room and, without thinking, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. He flinched at first, then relaxed slightly, as if letting himself trust someone, even for a moment. "You shouldn't carry everything alone," she said, voice steady. Jinwoo studied her, something unreadable in his gaze, before nodding once. In that silent exchange, he allowed her a hug, not long, not overtly intimate, but warm, grounding, and sincere. Aaliyah felt the tension in his body, the weight of his responsibilities, and yet, the hug carried a vulnerability that no words could capture. When they pulled back, the air between them was different, lighter, yet charged with a quiet understanding. Aaliyah realized that beneath the sharp suits and dangerous reputation, Jinwoo was human. Fragile even. And for the first time she felt a connection that went beyond employer and employee, a bridge forming between two people who hadn't realized they needed each other yet. That night, as she left the study, Aaliyah couldn't shake the feeling that the walls of the mansion weren't the only things slowly crumbling. Hearts were beginning to break through too. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, painting the mansion's grand halls with a gentle glow. Aaliyah moved quietly, careful not to disturb the rare calm that settled over the house before the day's chaos began. She had noticed something during the past week. Jinwoo rarely smiled, and when he did, it was fleeting, almost hidden. Today she decided she would try to change that. It wasn't much, just a small gesture. A homemade breakfast laid out on a tray with a single white rose she had picked from the garden. The moment Jinwoo entered the dining room, he froze. His sharp eyes softened as they swept across the tray, lingering on the rose. "This wasn't necessary," he said, his voice low, tinged with curiosity rather than his usual stoicism. Aaliyah smiled, setting the tray on the table. "Maybe not, but I thought you could use a little something unexpected." Her words carried sincerity, and Jinwoo found himself studying her in a way he hadn't before. The mansion's walls, the secrets, the danger, they all faded for a moment. He stepped closer, hesitated, and then, without a word, pulled her into a gentle hug. It was brief, but the warmth lingered, a quiet acknowledgement that her thoughtfulness mattered. Aaliyah returned it instinctively, feeling a rare softness in the man who often seemed untouchable. As they separated, Jinwoo's lips curved into the faintest smile, almost unnoticeable if one wasn't paying attention. "You're different," he admitted, voice softer than usual. "Unexpected. Not what I thought I would find here." Aaliyah chuckled lightly. "Good different or bad different?" she asked, teasing but with genuine curiosity. "Good," he replied without hesitation, his gaze meeting hers. And in that small moment, with breakfast and a hug, something shifted. The mansion didn't feel so intimidating, and Jinwoo didn't feel so untouchable. Their bond was quietly growing, built not on words alone, but on these shared gestures, these silent acknowledgments that neither had anticipated. The mansion's tranquility that evening felt fragile, like a glass ornament perched on a ledge. Aaliyah was folding linens in the hallway when she noticed a shadow flicker across the front gate. Her heart skipped, not in fear but in instinctive caution. Something was off. Before she could react, Jinwoo appeared behind her, sharp eyes scanning the perimeter. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, his voice low, almost growling with concern. Aaliyah met his gaze, sensing a mix of warning and care she hadn't heard before. A sudden noise outside, a car door slamming, made both tense. Jinwoo stepped closer, protective, placing a firm hand at the small of her back. Without thinking, she reached up, grabbing his arm instinctively, clinging for reassurance. In that brief contact, the tension in her chest eased, even as the danger lingered. He looked down at her, a flicker of emotion passing through his usually unreadable expression. "Stay close," he instructed, not as a command but as a promise. In response, Aaliyah let herself be pulled into a tight, comforting hug. It was a silent exchange of trust, each understanding the unspoken rules of protection and reliance. Minutes later, the moment of tension passed. The threat never fully materialized, but the experience left a mark. Aaliyah realized, in a way she hadn't before, that Jinwoo wasn't just a distant figure in a mansion. He was someone who would stand by her, who would guard her without hesitation. As they pulled apart, her hand lingered on his arm, and he allowed it. No words were needed. That evening, the mansion didn't just feel like a house. It felt like a fragile sanctuary, one they were quietly learning to protect together. And in that shared space, a deeper bond began to grow, built on trust, protection, and the quiet intimacy of a simple hug. The rain tapped gently against the mansion's windows, a soft rhythm that seemed to mirror Aaliyah's restless thoughts. She had spent the day cleaning and organizing, but her mind kept drifting to Jinwoo. There was a distance in him, a guarded world she could only glimpse through fleeting moments. Tonight she hoped to see more. She found him in the study, seated behind his desk, his posture rigid despite the storm outside. "You're still awake," she said softly, stepping closer, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He looked up, eyes tired but alert. "I sleep when I can," he replied, voice low, carrying a weight she hadn't noticed before. For reasons she couldn't explain, Aaliyah felt compelled to sit across from him. She spoke of her childhood, growing up in a neighborhood where every day was a lesson in resilience, the dream she carried despite the odds. Slowly she saw Jinwoo's gaze soften. His usual steeliness gave way to curiosity and something warmer, a flicker of trust. Then, almost reluctantly, he shared a glimpse of his own world. The pressures, the responsibilities, the loneliness that came with being in control yet feeling trapped by it. Aaliyah listened, offering small nods and gentle words, until finally she placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Before either of them realized, Jinwoo leaned slightly forward, allowing her to wrap him in a long, sincere hug. Not a gesture of romance, but one of shared understanding and quiet comfort. He exhaled and she felt the tension in his body slowly release. When they parted, the room seemed lighter, the storm outside less oppressive. In that moment, Aaliyah realized that bonds weren't just formed in grand gestures. They grew in these quiet exchanges, in trust offered and received, in hugs that said what words never could. And for the first time, she knew they were crossing the line from mere acquaintance to something profoundly personal. The mansion hummed with its usual quiet, but today there was an unusual tension in the air. Aaliyah was arranging fresh flowers in the grand hallway when she noticed a new assistant speaking closely with Jinwoo, laughing at something he said. A strange knot formed in her chest, a mix of surprise, unease, and something she hadn't expected, jealousy. She quickly reminded herself that she had no claim to this man's attention. Still, she couldn't deny the fluttering in her stomach as she watched from a distance. Jinwoo, unaware of her gaze, seemed relaxed, even amused, his rare smile directed at the other woman. Later that evening, Aaliyah found herself in the library, pretending to read while her mind replayed the scene. She didn't notice Jinwoo quietly entering until he cleared his throat. "You've been quiet today," he remarked, his voice calm but perceptive, as if he had sensed her inner turmoil. I was just organizing some things," she said softly, meeting his eyes. He studied her for a moment, and something in his expression shifted, a subtle recognition, an acknowledgement. Without a word, he closed the space between them and offered a gentle hug. It was brief but intentional, grounding. Aaliyah felt the warmth of his embrace, the quiet reassurance that despite the small storm of emotion she felt, she was seen and valued. Pulling back slightly, Jinwoo's eyes met hers, steady and unreadable, yet somehow softer than before. "You matter," he said quietly, words unspoken in meaning but clear in intent. In that moment, Aaliyah understood. Their connection was growing stronger, emotions more complicated, and the walls around both of them were slowly falling. What had begun as curiosity and comfort was evolving into something deeper, a recognition that neither could ignore. The night air was cool and quiet, the mansion's lights casting soft reflections across the garden path. Aaliyah had been tidying the veranda when she noticed Jinwoo stepping out from the shadows, his usual composed demeanor softened by the moonlight. "You're still awake," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. He nodded, his eyes scanning the stars above before landing on her. "I needed some air, and perhaps some company," he admitted, voice low but sincere. They walked in silence for a few moments, the only sound the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. Aaliyah's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the anticipation she couldn't quite explain. There was a tension in the air, an unspoken understanding that tonight things might change. Stopping by the fountain, Jinwoo turned to her. "Aaliyah, I've realized something," he began, hesitation threading his words. "You're unlike anyone I've ever met. You make this life bearable. I don't want to hide my feelings anymore." Aaliyah's chest tightened. She had felt the same pull for weeks, this quiet attraction that grew with every shared glance, every comforting gesture. Without thinking, she stepped closer, her hands brushing his, offering silent permission. And then he pulled her into a long, heartfelt hug. It was more than comfort. It was acknowledgement, vulnerability, and the first real act of trust between them. She rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of a heart she had grown to care for more than she expected. When they finally pulled apart, Jinwoo's gaze met hers, warm and unguarded. "This us. I want it," he whispered. Aaliyah smiled, her own feelings mirrored in his eyes. "Me too," she replied. That night, under the moonlight, the mansion seemed smaller, their world more intimate, as if the universe itself had paused to witness the beginning of something beautiful. The mansion never felt so tense. Aaliyah had been tidying the guest wing when distant voices reached her ears, rough, unfamiliar, and menacing. Her stomach twisted, instinct warning her that something was wrong. She hesitated, then felt a hand on her shoulder. "Jinwoo, you shouldn't be alone," he said, eyes sharp as they swept over the perimeter. Without waiting for her reply, he guided her to the main hall, keeping her close. Aaliyah felt the reassuring strength in his presence, the certainty that he would protect her no matter what. Moments later, the intruders never fully appeared, but the threat was enough to leave both of them shaken. Aaliyah's hands trembled slightly, and Jinwoo immediately pulled her into a firm, protective hug. It wasn't just comfort, it was a silent promise. "You are safe with me." She leaned against him, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, the solidness of someone willing to face danger for her sake. I don't want to leave your side," she admitted softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You won't have to," Jinwoo replied, his tone unwavering. "I won't let anything happen to you." That hug lingered longer than before, a quiet affirmation of trust and loyalty. In that embrace, words felt unnecessary. Their connection had grown beyond simple attraction. It was a bond forged in shared vulnerability, in the recognition that they could rely on each other when the world outside became threatening. When they finally parted, the storm outside seemed smaller, the mansion more like a sanctuary than ever before. Aaliyah realized as she met Jinwoo's steady gaze, that what they shared was rare, a trust unspoken yet unbreakable. And in that quiet moment, both understood that their hearts were entwined in a way that no threat could sever. The mansion was calm, bathed in the golden light of a late afternoon sun. Aaliyah arranged flowers by the window, her thoughts drifting to the journey that had brought her here, from the nervous first day to the countless small moments of trust, laughter, and quiet connection with Jinwoo. He appeared silently behind her, his presence familiar yet comforting. "You've made this place feel like home," he said softly. She turned, smiling, and in that moment the distance between employer and employee no longer existed. It was just them, two hearts that had found each other in a world full of walls. Without warning, Jinwoo pulled her into a long, warm hug. It was more than gratitude. It was acknowledgement, protection, and love woven together in one unspoken promise. Aaliyah rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of a heart that had once seemed untouchable. "I don't want to hide from you, or from this," Jinwoo whispered. "I want us, everything together." "I want that too," she replied, her voice steady, her hands clutching his jacket. The mansion, the city, the challenges, they all faded. In this hug they found certainty. Later, as they watched the sun dip below the horizon from the veranda, their hands intertwined, Aaliyah realized that love didn't always need grand declarations. Sometimes it grew quietly, in shared glances, comforting embraces, and the unwavering promise to be there always. And as the sky turned shades of amber and violet, they knew one thing for certain: this was forever.